Hey everyone, we're back here with the Think Truth podcast again. It's me, Elijah, and Paul again to talk about our continued topic of end times theology and different things like that. The misnomer of end times theology. Good. All right. So we have the topic of the mark of the beast today.
Yeah. So we should preface this by saying it's really important to make sure you watch the first episode because there's a lot of background stuff that's really important to getting all of this. So
absolutely,
we know this might be the most catchy sounding of the 3 episodes, but the first one is really important for background.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we discussed last time was we really want to honor the text, and if we're approaching the text from the wrong perspective on the genre, we're going to really come away with a message that the author never intended to communicate, or we're going to be searching for a meaning that the author really wasn't intending us to search for. So it's a thing really of we get stuck in these questions of like literal versus not literal, and like you said in the last episode, that's really the wrong question. Yeah. The question is, how do we best honor the author's meaning in the text, and come and find the things that he wanted us to find in the text.
Right. And we say author, we mean both the human and divine author.
Absolutely.
Right? So, yeah.
And so we talked a lot about how, this is not an isolated text where there's nothing like it in the world. I mean, the sense in which, this is inspired, that is certainly true. But in the sense of the type of text that Revelation is, this is like all over the place.
Yeah, it's very popular in early Jewish.
Yeah. So we need to we need to understand the kind of writing this is. And yeah, in a sense it is decoding, but it's decoding in the sense of you have to know the background, the symbols, so that when you come to it, you're coming to the same conclusions that the original listeners would have.
Right.
So, okay. So now we have this question of the mark of the beast, which has been hugely controversial.
It's a perennial question.
I think part of the interest that people have is like the like awfulness of it, like the violence appeal. It's like, whoa, this is really bad.
It's also sort of freaky because the idea is that it you just, if you do get it, you are not on God's side.
Yeah.
Right. And so you don't, any good Christian is going to kind of want to avoid that. Right?
Yeah. Well, and there's a sense in Revelation that the beast, whoever he or it or they are, is like trying to force this on you, or like really wants everyone to get it, whatever it
Very
is.
Much so.
And so you want to get it right. You want to make sure you're not on the wrong side.
Right. Because dire consequences if you are.
Yeah. So that's what we're going to go into today, talk about today, is like the question of how should we be viewing this mysterious, strange.
Or maybe not so mysterious or strange.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So let's jump in. Where do we find this idea first in Revelation?
So I think it first shows up in Revelation 13, but like it's scattered throughout kind of. So we have a reference in 13, 17, where it speaks of, and I think this is actually probably a good way to start, right? Good text, kind of, I shouldn't say a good way to start, a good text to focus on, for various reasons, but,
good. So let's read this and.
So background stuff. I'm always stopping and saying background stuff, but, 2 things. One, a lot of people nowadays have seemed to take it as kind of, what do people tend to, I don't know, when they hear the mark of the beast, like you hear all sorts of things. Yeah.
Well, there's the assumption that it's something physical.
Yeah, something physical,
that,
right?
You could see on everybody's forehead or hand or whatever.
Right.
And there's the idea that it's also mysterious. It's something that like not everyone's good. I think, I'm not sure where exactly this came from, but often it's seen as something that it's not going to be entirely clear unless you're really
could sneak up on you.
Fastidious. Yeah. Right. You got to be careful. And so, so you need to be discerning in order to figure out precisely what this mark is.
This thing is, right. Which I think I think John would agree with that, but in a completely different way.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So, so here and then the other thing is we have to remember what we said in the last episode. We talked a little bit about how names and numbers can be used for names, right? And that's really important because people often get hung up on the idea of the number, right?
Well, especially because John's like, you got to have some wisdom to get this,
Right.
So people think that
But they gloss over the part where he says it's somebody's name, right?
Yeah.
Now there's lots of controversy over the precise referent of this, and in fact, one of the fascinating things about interpreting this is that there's this significant textual variant. It's probably not original, but there's a textual variant here, where there are some manuscripts that read 616 instead of 666, right? Yeah. And that's interesting. It would be. So why, right? Who knows? It's possible it's just an unintentional scribal error, writing the Greek letter that stands for 1 instead of the Greek letter that stands for 6. It's also possible that a scribe intentionally changed it because he couldn't think of anyone's name that made sense with that number, right? We don't know. Yeah. So anyway, 666 probably is original, but the point is numbers stand for names in this type of literature. Okay, so let's read this. So this is the second beast. I saw another beast rising out of the earth. It had 2 horns like a lamb, and it spoke like a dragon. It exercises all the authority of the first beast in its presence, and makes the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, whose mortal wound was healed. Okay, so this first beast is a power, right? Probably kind of like Rome. And almost like a parody figure of Jesus, right? It dies and rises, essentially. Yeah. Right. Okay, so it performs great signs, even making fire come down from heaven to earth in front of people. By the signs that it is allowed to work in the presence of the beast, it deceives those who dwell on the earth, telling them to make an image of the beast that was wounded by the sword and yet lived. It was allowed to give breath to the image of the beast, and it would cause those who do not worship the image of the beast to be slain. And it causes everyone, from the small to the great, rich and poor, slave and free, so it doesn't matter who you are, to be marked on the right hand or the forehead, so that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark, which is the name of the beast or the number of the beast's name, right? His cell phone number. No, his gematria number. Yeah. This calls for wisdom. Let the one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, or maybe we could say it's somebody's name. It's somebody's number, right? And his number is 666. Okay, so that's what it says about that, right? So what's going on? So it says, there's this anti-God ruler, this anti-God sort of system.
So you're using beast and system as
yeah. Well, I think that you can't separate rulers from their nation in a sense, right? Yeah. So because like Babylon, Rome, Caesar is the bad guy, but Rome is the bad guy, right? For Daniel's visions, there's this interchange between sort of the nations that he sees coming and their kings. So they're kind of intertwined, I think. But we can say the system. So we can say the system. We can say the powers. We can say the rulers. I think anyway. Can kind of say that.
Yeah. So it causes, as in like the system is like pushing people towards
the ruler, system, whoever, whatever. But basically the anti-God forces, not to get too deep into like all these specifics, but we can say Rome maybe, or Babylon, or Antichrist, right? Remember the same John who writes this and speaks of Antichrist figure, anti-Messiah figures. Elsewhere says that we're waiting for the Antichrist, but Antichrist, the spirit of Antichrist is already in the world. So John didn't have this like idea that everything's kind of okay, and then all of a sudden this evil Antichrist shows up. But that like Antichrist, sure, there's a culmination, but it's a culmination of these anti-Messiah forces that are in the world, the whole time. And Rome is that, right? Yeah. So he basically the system or Rome or the anti-Messiah kind of realm basically forces people out of society, right? You cut off people economically and socially and culturally for if you don't participate by taking this mark of the beast. Yeah. Okay. Now, John is interesting because he kind of gives you a little bit of. So John loves these juxtapositions, right? So the very next thing he talks about is another mark, a different name, right? So if we go to the very next verse, then I looked, okay, and lo and behold, on Mount Zion stands the Lamb. And with him, 144,000 who had his name and his father's name written on their foreheads. So this is interesting because we have two beasts, the first beast and the second beast right before it, right? And they kind of relate to each other in these interesting ways. And so now we have the Lamb and his father.
And the beast is rising out of the earth, and the Lamb is on like Mount Zion. That's kind of interesting.
Yeah, that's interesting, right? Well, Mount Zion is sort of the anti. It's kind of the other mountain, right? There's the good mountain. Yes, the anti-Babylon, the anti-Rome, the anti-seven mountains of Rome, right? That Revelation talks about. So the 144,000 who have his name and his father's name written on their foreheads. Now look at that. Just one verse removed, you have the idea of another name written on the forehead, right?
Yeah.
And interestingly,
that's not significant.
Well, nobody's ever thought that meant some, spiritual piece of technology.
Yeah.
Right? Even or spiritual barcode.
His father's name written on their forehead.
Yeah.
Like, boom.
Name written on the forehead. It's exactly the same
formula.
Thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And now with the 144,000, this is really interesting. We could talk all about how this is meaning in this literature, these numbers are meant to symbolize, they're richly symbolic. So 144,000, if we go to chapter 7, yes. We could go and talk about how it's basically, it lists the 12 tribes of Israel, 12,000 from each tribe. So it's meaning, so the 12 tribes of Israel, there's 12 from each times 1,000. So it's meaning the fullness of God's people. Yeah. Right. And that's obvious. That's clear from the context where, so John often sees something. No, he sees something or he hears something, and then he turns around and he sees something else. But those two images are meant to be taken together. So he hears the Lion of Judah, right? And then he turns around. What does he see? A lamb that has been slain. And it's not, those aren't two different things. Mm-hmm. But this is why you should never, ever make a movie out of Revelation, because this works in literary imagery, but it's terrible if you try to put it all together on, it looks grotesque.
And so we have this.
Yes. Right. So in chapter 7, then you have the fullness of Israel, right? The 12 tribes. That's what John hears. Then he turns around and what does he see? The multitude from every tribe and nation that no one can number, right? So the innumerable multitude that is worshiping the Lamb, that is the 144,000.
Yeah, which is so important.
Yeah. So all of God's people, all of Jesus' people from every tribe and nation is the fullness of Israel. Right. Yeah. That's what it means.
That's amazing.
So anyway, so that's all packed into here, into chapter 14. Okay.
So you have this 144,000.
So you have the full, so God's people. So it's all God's people, right? Mm-hmm. And all of God's people are the ones, by definition, who have God's name and Jesus' name written on their foreheads. Right. And then, and then interestingly, see, all this imagery is so intertwined, because then it says, they have this song that they know. These are the ones who have not defiled themselves with women, for their virgins. And you're like, what? Right? So, yes. But the imagery, the sexual imagery in Revelation is all tied up with the idea of the harlot versus the bride, right? Yeah. So you have Babylon is the harlot, right? And Babylon is this woman who, sexually immoral and sits on the beast of Rome, right? And that is in contrast to the bride who keeps herself pure for the marriage supper. And
I always thought that was weird. Because you want to be part of the 144,000. Maybe right. I wasn't quite sure what that was, because some people say it's just Jewish people
right,
in the end or whatever.
Yeah.
But I was like, man, so these are like all unmarried people.
Yeah, it's like, oh shoot,
you kind of lose out if you get married. Like,
right, exactly. But no, that's not the point. It's basically and this imagery goes deep into the Old Testament with. Ever since God essentially married Israel, right? Idolatry and sexual immorality are paired. And so, so when it says that you have not defiled yourself, your virgins, this is speaking of spiritually, right? You're the one, you've kept yourself for Jesus the groom, right?
Good.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then, right, a few verses later, you get this. Another angel, a second, follows saying, "Fallen is Babylon the Great, she who made all nations drink the wine of the passion of her sexual immorality," right? So you got to be the person who doesn't fall for that.
Yeah.
If you're the virgin. Okay. So what is the mark of the beast? Well, I think it's in a lot of ways easier to ask the question, what is the seal or the mark of God?
Yeah.
Right.
Totally.
Which is, it's weird that people don't pair them, because it seems kind of obviously paired in Revelation. Revelation's full of these two, it's very dichotomistic, which is apocalyptic tends to be very dichotomistic. It's the black and white, the sons of light, sons of darkness, the good guys, the bad guys, right?
Yeah.
So, what does it mean to have the seal of God? What is that?
So does it find its definition? Because people think, so this is something God does, right? He puts his mark on them just as much as the beast puts his mark on those who follow him. Pardon me. So I think it gives definition, doesn't it? With understanding what the beast is and what the beast does.
Yeah.
Because the vision that John's portraying here is something of, the beastly power of Rome/Babylon.
Right.
Getting people to turn from a true faith to idolatry and things like that,
right.
Which is interesting because we know John, like some of the themes that John comes back to again and again, if you think of like 1 John,
right,
or other places, 1 John, 2 John, keep yourselves from idols and, love each other and don't choose, the way the world works, essentially. Like you think about
right.
John, the book of John, so focused on like avoid the world.
Yeah, exactly.
The system, right?
That's what it's about.
The beast.
Yeah, it's the beast. So in Revelation 7 is where you have this angel who shows up and seals everyone, stamps everyone on their foreheads with the seal of God, right? So what it really is a mark of belonging, right? A seal, a mark, a brand. It's essentially a brand, a branding, like that you would use for cattle or a slave, right? In the ancient world, slaves were often branded with this, seared with this tattoo.
Mark of their master.
Yeah, basically that says I belong to this guy, right?
Is there any sense in which, I'm actually kind of thinking off the top of my head, but is there any sense in which the angel here is sort of tying back to like the idea of like getting the Passover blood of the lamb like on the doorpost to like save you from the
I think
destruction?
No, that's a good thing to think, because the idea is that there's destruction coming, right? But we need to mark out those who are God's, right? Because they're going to escape the full destruction of the earth, right?
And of course, the image of the destroying angel is just all throughout Revelation.
Yeah, exactly. There's lots of them. So it's not that the righteous won't suffer. It's not that the righteous won't be part of really, really terrible things. And see, John's audience is like, yeah, we are part of that, right?
Yeah.
But the idea, the question in Revelation is, whose name are you bearing? Who do you belong to? That's the question, right? And do you have the mark? If you belong to Jesus, that means you're someone who's sealed and marked by his name. And that means that you avoid Babylon, that you avoid Babylon as harlot, and that you will not be defeated by Babylon as beast, right?
Yeah.
Right? That you may be persecuted and even killed, but if you're sealed with God's name, you will be the one at the end who, as it says in chapter 20, those who had not worshipped the beast or its image and had not received his mark on their foreheads or their hands, they reign. Right?
So the power and also the temptation.
Yeah, I think again, it's these two dangers, right? Of falling for the allure of the world system, and it's falling for, or it's cringing and sort of giving in under persecution. So two things. So the seal of God is I belong to God. The seal of the beast is the beast's name. Do you have the beast name tag on you? Are you wearing the beast's, polo shirt, basically? Right? Are you on his team?
Yeah.
Right? That's what it is.
And that's shown by essentially what, like the way you live, right? The way, and like at least in part, like, do you go along with the earthly system?
Well, 100%, that's what it is.
Worshiping idols and sexual immorality and
or any number of other things.
Yeah.
There's lots of possibilities, right? Yeah. So I think, people could say, well, but I'm not cast out of society. No one's telling me I can't buy or sell. Maybe not you, right? But there are people who read, and again, this is apocalyptic, so there's going to be very intense imagery used, and some people are going to experience this in very literal ways.
Yeah.
And
of course, we absolutely have Christians who face this sort of thing on a micro level in the United States.
Yeah.
People who lose their jobs because
yeah. And there's people in other countries. Of course, we can't think that this is written only to Americans, right?
Yes, absolutely.
But think about, some Christians, say, second, third century, whatever, where Christians are kind of growing, and there come these decrees where everyone must. The Roman government doesn't really care what cults you worship, you participate in or not. It just really, it's do your thing. That's great. However, the one thing that sort of keeps the empire together is your allegiance to Caesar and to the emperor. So you have to, once a year, you have to just kind of sacrifice a teeny weeny bit of incense or something to the emperor. And when you do that, you get a little receipt, a little certificate saying, I did that, so I'm good for this year, right? So this becomes a big issue for Christians at this time, right? A couple centuries after John's writing. And for them, I think they read this text and they say, and if you don't, then you get executed, right? So they're Christians who understandably, right, who fall for this and say, man, it's just a little pinch, right? But and this, by not doing this, I'm cut off from society. I'm out, right? And I'm running for my life and probably just gonna be murdered. That is the mark of the beast for them, right? Yeah. Because that's saying my allegiance belongs ultimately to Caesar. But I think, so this is where, again, this kind of eventually will segue into our next episode where we talk about more broadly, like, how do we apply Revelation?
Yeah. Super important question.
It is a very important question, because a lot of what we're saying is that a lot of this stuff is meant not just to tell us sort of what's going to happen the last few years before Jesus comes back, but it tells us kind of how life is going to be and what attitude we're supposed to have for this entire span of time from Jesus' ascension to his return. Yeah. Right? And that ultimately all this imagery does culminate. Like, the book of Revelation isn't just this timeless thing. It does go somewhere. It does go to final judgment and new creation. But at the same time, it gives us these big motifs that apply for the last 2,000 years. So I think the big question, when people think of the mark of the beast as this thing that might accidentally happen to them if they accept the wrong piece of technology or the wrong vaccine or something like that.
The wrong energy drink.
Yeah. Any number of things, is that you actually massively cheapen what it is. And I think you can actually, it can distract you from the fact that you may actually be falling for the mark of the beast.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. So yeah, let's get more into that. So I think we've talked a good amount about, like, what were the original readers going to get out of this text, because it's pretty clear there's the Roman imagery, there's the idea of the system trying to lock you out if you don't do what everyone else does around you, as in idolatry and worship of the emperor and stuff. But when it comes down to the sort of modern day question of, for any one of us, whether we live in a persecuted country or most of our audience probably live in the United States or Canada, how do we then think about this mark of the beast? I think what you said there's so critical, because I think a lot of people say, wait a minute, you're trying to distract people from caring about, you're gonna, you're not taking this literally, so you're gonna miss it, right?
Yeah, and I'm kind of saying the opposite. I think if you take it too literally, you might miss it.
Yeah.
And that's good Christian. Even if you take it literally, if you're a good Christian, you won't.
Yeah.
But the thing is, again, if what John is saying, what God, the Holy Spirit is saying, is you belong to one of two people, or two people is the wrong word. You belong to God, or you belong to Rome. You belong to the kingdom of Jesus, or the false kingdom of the world. Yeah. That's what John's saying. And you're marked by one or the other. You have the stamp of belonging of one or the other. So the mark of the beast then is, we should be terrified of it, right? And we should, I think, John is telling us to, in all of our life, and because we live in this fallen world, we live with the force of, quote, Rome, the kingdoms of the world all around us, as John says, in, like you alluded to in 1 John, the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, pride of life, temptation, ostracization, right? That in all of our life, we need to be vigilant to say, am I living as somebody who bears the name on our forehead of Yahweh, right? And that actually, so this is what the high priest wears in the Old Testament, right?
Right.
He wears the
Holiness
name,
to the Lord.
yeah, to Yahweh on his forehead. He bears the name of Yahweh, and he bears the name of Israel on his chest, right? So do we live like someone who's devoted to Yahweh, or are we in maybe subtle ways showing allegiance or compromise with the beast, right? And that can be in how we do our business dealings. Yeah. It can be in the attitudes that we have about politics. It can be in our sexual morals. It can be in the way we love each other and our enemies and stuff. The allure that money has, like all that's John. This crazy imagery is meant to help us to rethink things that seem very normal to us. That's one of the things Apocalyptic does. Yeah. We're so used to the world as it is, everything seems normal. But John, so it's not a code, it's a pair of glasses. It's not, I need to figure out what this means, but it's more like, if I steep myself in this crazy way of explaining things, then I need to take that, and when I go out into my regular life, instead of seeing just powerful businesses and a powerful government and temptations for and sort of nice stuff, I'm supposed to say, oh, but at another level, all that stuff is the beast.
Yeah.
Right. And I, every day of my life, I'm going to be tempted to give in and bear that and get that mark of the beast. And in other words, act as though I belong to that system instead of the kingdom of Jesus.
Yeah. So if you're reading the book of Revelation thinking the question of when's the beast coming, you miss the fact that the beast is here.
Yeah, the beast is here. Yeah, the beast is very much here. Now, sure, maybe at the end there's going to be sort of a final iteration of that. Mm-hmm. But that's all it's going to be, a final iteration. It's not going to be something massively discontinuous with what came before. Yeah. It's just going to be the last anti-God bit of the anti-God system that's sort of ramped up. Yeah. And the best way to avoid that caving then is to remember that still exists in Nuche now. Mm-hmm. And so we need to avoid it now, right?
Yeah. And have the mark of the Lord.
Have the seal of God and avoid the seal being stamped with, Rome or whatever on us. And of course, that makes so much sense with everything the rest of the New Testament teaches, right? Yeah. The rest of the New Testament just really isn't concerned with, something that's unrelated to my heart showing up accidentally and damning me for eternity, right?
Yes.
And yet, and maybe that's a caricature. I mean, that's a bit of a caricature. But I think that's my big gripe with the sort of the mark of the beast as something more physical, is that, yes, it is in popular thinking, it is still aligned with you have to often going along with an antichrist or something like that. But still, what John's saying is something deeper and something that the rest of the New Testament says. Watch your heart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now I'm thinking of a passage in Zechariah, which I'm curious if you think this is connected or not. There's this passage in Zechariah where, of course, you have the background of the high priest having holiness to the Lord on his forehead. And then Zechariah says there's coming a day when everything, all of God's people, and even like right down to like the pots and pans. Yeah. Yeah. Everything's going to have holiness to the Lord written on it.
Right.
Do you think that's significant in the way John may have the background to what John may have been seeing in some of this?
Yeah, I think so.
If he would be seeing in a very real sense that God's people were living in the eschaton.
Oh yeah.
And so they were the people who had holiness to the Lord. Not just, there's not a high priest, but we're all priests. And so we all have this holiness to the Lord.
Right. And I think that one of the themes in Revelation is the temple, right? And temple, it's kind of a little fuzzy. What exactly is temple, right? And it's certainly not, what it isn't is a big building anymore, right? At the end in Revelation 21:22, it seems like it's just the presence of God, but it's the presence of God permeating the entire new creation. Right. But that whole new creation is also the same thing that's pictured as the bride, right? And so yes, what happens is that staying holy, that avoiding immorality, the sort of the immorality of the beast, right? That that sort of keeping oneself pure or whatever is intertwined with this temple motif, right? That you are the people that are already priests and that are preparing yourself for that marriage / that day when you all together will be the place where God dwells fully, right?
Yeah, right.
And so, and that is the fulfillment of the idea from the prophets, where that, you know, of course, in the temple, you had to everything. If you were going to use it for temple service, it had to be like really special.
But there's a designated space where everything inside that space is going to have to be
and the specific like implements and instruments that you use sort of for sacrifice. You can't just go and
it's like, oh shoot, I forgot my spoon. Let me grab it from the house.
No, but the prophets are saying, but in that day when Yahweh pours out His Spirit on everyone, the whole community is going to be so holy that you just go into your cupboard and pull out a pot or a pan and just use that to sacrifice, right? Because everything's becoming so holy. And Revelation certainly is seeing that as being fulfilled in Jesus. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Wow. Well, this picture, I think, to me, of the mark of God is so crucial and such a beautiful part of the book of Revelation and the encouragement that the book of Revelation is supposed to be. Now we're getting into, in the next episode, more of the question of how do we get into the book of Revelation as a text for us to not only understand, but also to appropriate and enjoy and learn from in every sense. And so how do we apply it? We're going to get into that next time, but this has been a really good discussion. I think I see a lot better discussion emerging in recent years among the Anabaptists about what the mark is. It's great. It's going in a good direction, and we look forward to coming back here in a week or two and discussing the next question of application.
Yep. Sounds good.